Welcome back to the Rollup High Roller community. As always, nothing on the Rollup is to be construed as financial advice. We are just some educators in the DeFi space. Toss us a quick like, give us a share, a repost, send it to a friend who may want to watch this, and finally, give us a sub or a follow. It means the world to help support credibly neutral educational content in DeFi. We're here to educate, empower, and enrich you, and let's jump in.
Welcome to DeFi by Design, where we talk all things blockchain and cryptocurrency while striving to educate, empower, and enrich.
Welcome back to the DeFi by Design podcast. On today's episode of Animal Planet, we have two penguins and a talking bear named Smokey. We got Rob, part of the Berachain. Rob, GM.
Yes, I am part of the Beras fam. I am a penguin, but I'm also a bear. So on this episode of Animal Planet, we have some crossover species, and I think that's particularly relevant to the modular thesis, as there's no longer monolithic animals or chains. All we have is modules and mindsets. And our esteemed guest Smokey on the show today. Smokey, welcome.
GM guys, thank you for having me. We got ourselves a whole ass to do over here, so I love to see it.
It's lit. And you're the Smoking the Bear, which is the guy that they have in national parks in the States telling you not to litter. Is that where your name came from?
Yeah, I'm just trying to avoid on-chain garbage, honestly, man. I think that when we were starting Berachain, we were all like, we should kind of like have fun bear adjacent names, and I just thought Smokey the Bear was kind of funny. So got to prevent forest fires, got to prevent rugs, all the fun stuff along the way.
Now, you know what? I think I told you this on the live stream too, and something that just been learning more and more recently about branding and pertinent to your Smokey the Bear is I feel like you guys have done such a good job of like embracing this jester vibe of like just having fun on chain with your homies and like carving that position against all the competitors. Like there's all these different competitors that are competing on like cost, speed, throughput, decentralization, and like Berachain just like, dude, like we have the best memes.
I think that, I'm hoping that we can differentiate a number of those angles too, but I also do think that a lot of it is an attention economy thing at the moment, for better or for worse. The space is definitely rapidly maturing, but I think a lot of folks on chain share a relatively similar demographic and have been like raised in this like internet era where you can sort of have fun with things a little bit more, right? For better or for worse, right? So I think that we really do try to have like what we've, often referred to as like a bit of a mimetic Trojan horse internally, which is to say like, lots of fun and a good time on the outside and generally, to be honest, on the inside as well. But, basically wrapping up on the inside, a whole bunch of good tech and a whole bunch of, useful design and tokenomics that hopefully push things to the next level a little bit.
Definitely. Yeah, I like to think of, not to get too far off track, but the ETF that recently got approved as somewhat of a Trojan horse. It's just kind of like small steps of adoption that, ultimately lead to like that last domino of the entire global economy happening on chain.
Totally, man. And I think that like, making things accessible goes a really long way. I think that, there's times where you'll see a deck, you'll see something that's like, okay, we're like a ZK, and then like add another acronym, and then like there's some circuits and there's like some AI in there. Like I think someone actually tries to parse the idea, and they're like, what the fuck am I looking at? And perhaps the future of the space does have a lot of these things under the hood. But I actually think abstracting away some of the complexity does tend to be productive. Because I think one of the things that we've said a bunch internally is perhaps an unfortunate truth of this space is like people don't read, right? People don't read. People don't like to do math. When you look at the vast majority of users, people like to look at something and be like, okay, do I understand this like really quickly? And that's also one of the things that we've been, working toward as much as possible with Berachain. Like, how do we make this, grokkable in a second? How do you make these things easy to grasp, right? I think Solana has done a great job of doing that. For example, it's like, okay, there's like fast and cheap transactions, good UX. Right, like I think that it's really important to make things bite-sized and digestible, and I think that having a little bit of fun along the way can very much do so.
Yeah, and even dive further into that as we start with this holistic scope of kind of how you guys kind of kept this aura of, I guess, mysteriousness, similarly with kind of building behind the scenes, but also just like this like raving community. Like, what are some of the key takeaways from building that you have, especially through the Bear, as to how to keep the community so engaged, and just kind of, again, on the positioning and branding side of things, just kind of having that differentiation? Like, what would you say were some key takeaways that you've learned through the process leading up to testnet now, that you could share with other builders for, how they could really position, what they're doing and build their communities in such a way, which you guys have?
Yeah, no, thank you, man. I think it's an interesting one. We've tried to think a lot about it in retrospect, because even as we expand, we have to think a lot about, like, how do you maintain that edge, or how do you maintain that organic feeling? Because I think as Quest platforms start rolling out, and as airdrop farmers and yada 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 all start, like, coming out of the woodworks, it's really easy to lose that authenticity. And I think that a lot of it comes down to having the right pillars within the community, especially. I think that, like, Chainlink is probably one of the groups that we tip our hats to the most, or take some degree of inspiration from in terms of how they did it, in that they have very cool tech, and some that powers the majority of useful on-chain actions nowadays, or a very meaningful portion of it. But they also just had, like, the most autistic community possible, which was beautiful. Like, they didn't care if price was up, they didn't care if price was down. They were just like, yes, I'm a Lake Marine, right? And I think that when we try to go in retrospect on that, there's no substitute for actually, like, spending time with the community. And I know that's a little bit, like, corny / like, people are like, oh, community is just a meme, you can fork community, blah blah blah. And listen, I think it is highly affected by price action. I don't think that anyone is oblivious to that fact. I do think that actually spending time with these folks, understanding who they are, what they're motivated by, what their life stories are, so on and so forth, can go a long way. And what it comes down to more than that is identifying those pillars within the community that can form their own sub factions, right? So people who really identify with the vision, which I think can also very much be hard in crypto at times, because it's just in many cases a hot rolling ball of money, going from center of attention A to center of attention B. And finding those groups that can, like, basically act as nodes within your own ecosystem, right? Your community isn't its own funky validator set. So, you have people who will pop up and effectively, end up creating their own tribe. And I think that gets really powerful. And one of the reasons I thought a lot about, like, Chainlink in that same manner is, people know about, like, the OG community guys at Chainlink, like, they are not unknown, like, Rory and some of those folks. But when you ask the community about, like, who is a community lead, they'll throw, like, 7 to 10 different names at you of, like, just people who had their own, like, massive followings, right? Like Chainlink God before he became Chainlink God, Askbuster, so on and so forth. It's just like, it's about having those figures that emerge naturally and that you sort of help, I'd say, nurture into, like, pillars of the community. And also making sure that you have a good grasp on who those folks are, and ensuring that they're, constructive forces for good, because it's just as easy to have a bunch of, like, really shitty folks do the same thing. So I guess you think of it as a curation process more than anything else. And I think that along the way, it's, trying to find ways to add value or drive value to people, right? Whether that's keeping them informed about cool things, whether that is, sharing, little bits of information that flow around that you're exposed to. Just generally trying to be helpful, I feel, goes a long way as well, and good communities are built around that. And then I think a lot of it also comes from the initial curation, right? A lot of the group that formed Berachain sort of came out of a number of these different, like, DeFi 2.0 ecosystems. So the groups from, like, Curve and, like, Alchemics and Ohm and so on and so forth, like, they all served as that initial user base or bear holder base, if you will. And they were used to, like, just memeing the shit out of things and, like, flooding their own bags and just generally being lackadaisical. And I think that having that at the core of the community actually helped us massively. I think that if we had gone ground up, without that sort of initial user base to grow out of and have, like, guide the culture, it could have been much, much more difficult.
I love the sentiment you describe around the community and how each member of the community, they're funky validators. And I think that's a very interesting mental model to think about, how the kind of the beacons and each individual within the community, they play very similar roles, to kind of, like, gossiping to other nodes, and how each member of the community is a node in that funky community validator set. And there's a lot of parallels that we could draw there.
No, big time. Like I honestly hadn't thought about it before. Then I was like, that's actually not the worst mental model for it, right? Like, they carry a massive role within the network. They have peer-to-peer interactions. They sometimes take down the network, and they got to update their priors every now and then. So there's definitely some overlap.
Very cool. And to double click on like how you guys like were able to amass like this community and also intertwine these vibes across different sets. You mentioned a few other projects that the Berachain community spawned from. How did you kind of like pick up members of each of those communities? How did you bring all of those pre-existing projects and communities together?
Yeah, I think it was at the time, this was the summer of 2021. My co-founder Papa and I were spending a lot of time in a number of these different like project discords and servers, just like honestly, in some cases, just fucking around and having fun. In other cases, discussing, just speculating on various nonsense, right? And I think that when you find enough like, kindred souls kind of thing, then it becomes a little bit easier to rally them around a certain cause. And I remember at the time we really thought the Parallel was super cool. Still do. I think they're doing a lot of really good things, like the NFT game. And we were like, it could be kind of fun to just like have fun with something in the NFT space and see where it goes. And it really was not that serious. And Pop was like, all right, let's make 100 JPEGs of Beras smoking weed and see what happens. And I was like, so we then effectively raffled them off in some of these different discords. And I think there was overlap amongst those communities as well. So it's easy to see someone from Ohm and then the Prax Discord, and they're like, oh, this sort of goes 1-to-1, right? And I think that stringing those groups together really came together relatively naturally, right? It was folks who were both risk on enough to not give a shit about like eating like what was 0.069 ETH at the time at an NFT of a bear smoking weed. But we were also like, okay, maybe this could turn into something a little bit more interesting given its roots. But yeah, there really were no plans for the chain. There was no plans for like, the rebasing NFTs or whatever it was out of the gates. It was just like, okay, let's fuck around, find out, and see what happens. So I think that curation that happened over time was just largely because we were already having fun in certain communities, and by nature, it became logical for those groups to be dragged along.
Yep. I think that totally makes sense. Do you guys have a name for your community? Just the Beras?
Just the Beras, man. I think that we've been playing around with that Bear Brigade kind of thing more recently. I think that there's something to that. I wouldn't say that it's like locked as of yet, but I think there's something there. You want it to be easy and approachable. I think that we've seen a lot of like funny other things spawn up recently. Like there's like people being like Mina mommies. Then there's like Tia something else that I won't say. But they're just like there's been some good alliteration memes. So I've also been thinking about that. Like, is it Bera Baddies? I don't know, but there's definitely something in the mix.
Banger. Yes. So digging a bit deeper into like kind of the tech here. I also like the mental model and kind of like the learning mechanism of these like bite-size pieces of these models. And if we look at like Berachain's Twitter bio, I pick out 3 bite-sized pieces of information that we can kind of like put together the Berachain. So the 3 are EVM equivalent L1, 2 is built on the Cosmos SDK, and the 3rd piece is that it's powered by proof of liquidity. You mentioned that one of the communities that was kind of like part of Berachain's origin story was Ohm. So I'd like to start with proof of liquidity, and then these other bite-sized pieces of information in sequence.
Yeah, for sure, man. So is it most helpful if I just sort of like dive in and explain how POL works effectively / like what proof of liquidity really is?
Definitely.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, so proof of liquidity, as we see it, is effectively a variant on delegated proof of stake. And it's not super complex or super funky. I think the best way to think about it is that it's really meant to align incentives between liquidity and security at the protocol level. So how that works in application is that effectively the only way to earn the staking token and our governance token of Berachain, which is called BGT, or the Bear Governance Token, a little bit on the nose, is by first doing the work of providing liquidity to a set of core primitives. And over time, any smart contract that's approved by governance that's built on Berachain. So the way that works is that the chain itself, has a full, EVM environment that you can deploy whatever Solidity smart contract on. But there's also a couple, very basic DeFi Legos that are built into the chain. This is effectively an ambient liquidity DEX, a perpetual futures vault, and a stablecoin lending market. And users can basically LP in these three things off the bat, and eligible pools across these three services, which are meant to be there on one hand to attract initial liquidity, but on the other hand to bootstrap security, and to ensure that any of these sources of generation of the staking token are safe, as opposed to from a third-party contract. So you basically LP in those and you receive the BGT token. There's no way to market buy BGT. There's no way to go on Binance and just get a bunch of BGT. You have to do the work of providing liquidity to the ecosystem in order to earn it. And the way that we see that is there's a whole bunch of different ways of playing it, but it's effectively, you are turning your liquidity into a form of security without sacrificing that same liquidity. Your liquidity remains useful. It is providing value and adding value to the on-chain ecosystem, but in turn, it is allowing security to be added to the chain itself in the form of that BGT token generation. And I think that is really what makes proof of liquidity pretty exciting. And that in order for there to be security, there must be liquidity. And then if you think about, sort of how that evolves over time, a lot of what we think about within Berachain is, how do we actually have a reason for applications to exist on our network? I think that it's so easy to, spin up a random UniV2 fork or an Aave fork or whatever it is and just dump them somewhere and, try to farm for grants or be hey, this is going to fill a Mad Lib role in this ecosystem. Our goal was really to find a way for applications building on Berachain to be uniquely advantaged or really to have an edge by building there and a reason to exist there. So what that really means actually is that, once the chain goes live and, as users start accumulating BGT, et cetera, there can effectively be a governance vote at any point in time, allowing for other smart contracts or other pools on the network to become eligible sources of BGT yield, such that one can basically LP in that pool. Let's say it's an NFT AMM, let's say it's a social fi platform, let's say it's an options vault, whatever it may be, and actually receive emissions in the form of the chain staking token, as opposed to perhaps just the emissions and the fees of the protocol that they're LPing in. So for protocols, it's really meant to decrease their cost of user acquisition or capital acquisition and liquidity attraction. And for the chain, the way that it actually works is that the distribution of block rewards across the entire network is set by the validators, which we've never actually seen or had happen before. So validators effectively each have their own set of what we either call a cutting board, a gauge, effectively a pie chart, where they forward their block rewards minus their commission to these liquidity pools across the network. So to start, it's just pools across the DEX, the purpose lending market. But as more and more applications launch on the chain, all these can become eligible. So it actually also encourages protocols to work with validators and to basically find ways to bootstrap their own liquidity by cutting a deal with the validator and saying, hey, I'm going to give you this amount of my native token or this amount of emissions of some other form in exchange for you directing BGT emissions towards my protocol or my pool in the chain DEX. So we really think about it as an incredibly, I think, user and protocol centric chain, but giving validators an unprecedented degree of influence around economic incentives and the actual operations of the chain. And I think the last part that probably helps make this go round / make a little more sense is that we of course care a lot about BGT holders because they're the folks who have provided liquidity in the first place. They're driving a whole bunch of value to the network, and basically any application being powered by the chain has a portion of its fees being pushed towards BGT holders. So in that manner, BGT also becomes an asset that is, useful for people to hold on to in terms of basically, being bullish on activity flowing through Berachain as a whole network itself. So ideally, over time, more and more applications are becoming powered by proof of liquidity, and the users who are staking BGT, securing the chain, and basically, delegating to those validators are effectively, earning fees from the entire network's operation and the suite of applications that is powered by the chain. And then I think the last part of the equation is that at any point in time, your BGT can be burned one way into Beras, the liquid gas token of the network. So you effectively have a set of choices. You can either hold your BGT and by staking with different validators, have an influence on where emissions go across the network, and earn fees from the network's operation and all the applications that are on top of it. Or you can hold a liquid token, Bera, and be exposed to that and then have that liquidity preference. So it really comes down to whatever people want to, whichever choice people want to make. I just rambled a whole bunch at you guys, but I hope that made a high level sense and can help break it down as needed.
Definitely, yeah. Incredible tokenomics, and I'm sure Andy wants to keep going on that path. Just to make sure that this is an actionable piece that our listeners can take away.
Yeah.
What do you recommend? Like, what is the mechanism for our audience to acquire BGT? And then, you also mentioned how that unlocks this world of possibilities. You did mention that you must provide liquidity to the network in order to get BGT. Where should they go? How should they do that?
Yeah, for sure. There's a few different ways you can do that. One is, I think the simplest or one of the easiest ways of doing that is effectively just like LPing in the DEX, right? There'll be a few pools that'll be eligible for emissions out of the gates. There'll be a pool with some of the majors. There'll be a pool with different stables. There'll be a pool with Beras/Honey, like the network stablecoin, which is, one-to-one collateralized by USDC, et cetera. I'm trying to think what else will be relevant. There'll be the perps vault, where you can choose to collateralize the vault using Honey, again, just like the one-to-one stablecoin. So I think both of those are quite easy. And then there's also going to be opportunities within the lending market, I believe, upon launch. So the way I would think about it is, depending on your risk parameter, you can hold volatile assets like, wrap Bitcoin or ETH or Bera perhaps, and then LP them, within the DEX to basically be, exposed to those BGT rewards. You can collateralize the perps vault. You can get involved in the lending market. I think it'll really just be up to one's risk parameters. And then for application builders, I think there's a whole bunch of different ways that they can play on Berachain. The simplest one is probably basically launching their smart contracts, launching their front ends, what have you, and then pushing forward a governance vote saying, hey, we're going to give X% of our fees to BGT stakers, and in exchange we want to become, and Y% of emissions perhaps to BGT stakers. In exchange, we want to become eligible for emissions, within the chain cages effectively. And then they try to partner up with different validators to say, hey, you guys should direct a portion of your block rewards towards us. And I think that can, just be super exciting for protocols that are looking to basically bootstrap their liquidity and user base, because they'll effectively have juiced emissions from the chain itself, along with whatever native token emissions they might choose to use. And then I think that, we're setting up matchmaking systems and stuff like that as well, such that users, I should say primarily protocols and validators, can find ways to work together. And then there'll be sort of a number of these pages that actually demonstrate the yields, just from the pool activities and, just from the perps operating, what have you, interest rates on the lending market, so on and so forth, along with that when boosted by BGT yields when relevant.
And when does that functionality become available?
Yeah, so that's going to be available right out the gates. The perp sender lending market, may be turned on by governance over time. Just want to be very careful about how that process is handled. But I think that from our end, to start earning BGT very simply with the DEX upon mainnet, and all the different products are available on the testnet right now for people to get more familiar with.
Yeah, I've gotten word that the arcade mode in the testnet, I've been a little bit slammed trying on that thing, but I've heard it's quite.
Oh yeah. There's the Honey Minter, which is what allows you to turn your USDC into Honey, has two modes. There's like a simple mode, and then there's like an arcade mode, like a claw machine and stuff, just because we thought that'd be kind of fun. I would recommend giving that a go. Hopefully when things are a little bit jankier, less janky, I should say.
Yeah, cool. So with regards to the dual token design, how is the, I suppose, non-fungible token? How do you plan to ensure there's no market for that? Because like in EVM chains, you can just spin up a Uniswap market for anything.
Yeah, for sure.
Is it transferable? What's the kind of tech behind that?
Yeah, you got it. It'll effectively be soul bound, right? So like, the way that people will see their BGT is effectively just like a number in their wallet kind of thing. We may be able to have like a proxy ERC ticker as well that just shows like their BGT balance, just for ease of keeping an eye on things. But really the token will be soulbound, and we won't be able to, one will not be able to create like a locked or liquid market for it in any manner.
Right. Okay, cool. Yep. And then why did you choose Cosmos SDK? And
Yeah.
how has your design choices from, I mean, shit, and it must have been 2021 when I first heard about Berachain, so or early 22. How have your design choices changed over the time as we've evolved into all different types of blockchains and just what's happened over the bear until now? How's your vision change?
Yeah, for sure. I think what we've probably done most over time is err towards safer systems, especially at the gates. I think there's been times where we had more aggressive goals, if you will, in terms of how spicy we could make some of these products. But as we talk to more and more experienced builders, as we battle tested more and more things internally, I think we also really want to make sure that we stay incredibly cognizant of the fact that we're going to be trying a new thing for the first time in the form of proof of liquidity. And it's important to make sure that we do not have too many avenues for risk. I'd love to be able to make things cooler and cooler over time, whether that be at the DEX layer, whether that be at the perps layer, whether that be at, different sort of, I'd say, mechanisms around POL, even, stablecoin type stuff. But to start, we want to make things incredibly, incredibly safe. And also incredibly, incredibly legal, to be very clear. There's no fun in people having to deal with alphabet agencies, and that's why we've tried to take every step possible to remain compliant with all the work that we do. So we can be sort of bare smoke and WeChain and less serious on the outside, but we can also be very serious when it comes to the stuff that really matters. I think that when it comes to like our vision of building like on Cosmos / EVM on Cosmos as a whole, we had a brief flirting session with Ethermint and trying to use that as our library of choice. But really found that from, I'd say, a few different angles, we ran into some issues just from a quality of life / ease of use point of view. And we basically made the jump at some point and said, hey, let's go and do what we can to basically, build our own VM from the ground up, which is Polaris. And Polaris is effectively our implementation of EVM on Cosmos. I'm trying to give it a little bit more of a modular structure. I'm trying to make sure that we would basically have, full, gethRPC compatibility, and basically do everything we can to replicate an EVM-like or an EVM equivalent user experience without having to reinvent the wheel. Because while we are a Cosmos chain from a validator logic point of view, I very much do see us as an EVM, facing chain, if you will, in terms of our user base, in terms of our developer base, and want to do, as much as possible to make that easy for people to use over time. Because I think there's already so much friction in terms of, basically building in new ecosystems. And we wanted to make sure that from a dev tooling point of view, from an ease of use point of view, from familiarity point of view, there were things there that people knew, whether that be interfaces for some of the core applications that are built into the chain, or just broadly the dev environment. So, we tried out stuff with Ethermint at first and just found that it wasn't, the most ideal option for us. So then built out Polaris, and it's been exciting to see more adoption of that. There's teams like Argus and Weedman Cash and a few others in stealth that want to actually use it as their VM of choice as well. So we're really excited to be, helping to I guess help other builders a little bit, and would love to be able to dedicate more time towards it itself down the road. Just right now have been all hands on deck on sort of core Berachain stuff. And then I think that beyond that, we've just tried to make sure that our apps are simple and safe and super battle tested. So slight improvements or variations of known designs, such that we can, mitigate as much risk as possible when we're bringing Berachain to life, because there's just so many different things happening at once, and you have to minimize, attack area for things to go wrong. Just because I think, if you've been in the space for the last few years, you've seen how many wild hacks and bugs we've seen. And you've seen how, the tiniest errors of like 0.0001 or whatever on Kyber could result in, one of the most known or oldest primitives, ending up hit, right? So in short, I think that we've erred towards safety, and we've erred towards solving problems that absolutely need to be solved to ensure that DevX and user experience are optimized. And in the interim, just trying to do our best to make sure that we maintain a very high bar of quality in terms of everything we do. I think the other thing that's probably changed the most is the stablecoin Honey. Honey's had like a few different iterations. There's, one that was going to be more spicy and have like multiple different manners in which it was going to be collateralized. There was another one that was a little more CDP-esque, but especially with like, legislation and some of the bills that are under consideration at the moment, we wanted to keep things as incredibly kosher as possible. And moreover, just encourage people to find exciting uses for honey as we expand, broadly over time.
Yeah, it is easier to get a little bit more exotic as time goes on. It's tough to kind of like put that genie back in the bottle if that's how it starts.
You got it. I think it's a lot easier, and especially once the network is decentralized, then our initial work or our initial contributions on the software side really aren't what determine the outcomes. It's very much what the community tries to push it towards. And I think as the core team, as the foundation, we'll always do everything we can to err on the side of caution, and I think we'll try to recommend the community do the same. Though ultimately we don't have full control of that or really any control. We wouldn't be participating in any of that stuff, right? So, it'll be exciting to see, but I hope that it errs towards sustainability for the long term.
Very cool. So the community is already relatively vast, and I think it's a common term to say when it's decentralized, it always seems like it's kind of like something that we're reaching for and never can quite grasp. What does that path to decentralization look like? And maybe this could be phrased in a way that it's like a message to the community, because it's ultimately in the hands. What does that path look like, and what are some of the milestones and ultimate goals?
Yeah, it's a good question, man. I think as we think about it, things to get interesting over time are, on one hand, of course, making sure that we have as decentralized as the validator set as possible, because I think that does play a massive role, especially within the Cosmos ecosystem. From a perspective of geography, from a perspective of alignment, there's your classic staking shops like your Figments and your Kilns and your Coinbase Clouds and so on and so forth. But you've also got different like geographical communities like the massive validator group in Vietnam or Thailand or what have you, right? So I think we want to make sure that we have a broad variety of people's opinions represented. I think that with the added I'd say intertwining of liquidity and security here, it's also really important that the validators and the community itself helps new projects and groups that are new to the ecosystem getting off the ground, and errs away from gatekeeping or sort of having like an insiders club of sorts, right? I think it's very easy for these things to form. I think they almost naturally do form under almost any scenario, but I don't think that should be the norm. I think that should be an exception, really, right? You should do as much as you can to enable new entrants to the ecosystem. I think it's a fiscally aligned incentive, and I think it's generally a morally or philosophically aligned incentive as well. And then I think that beyond that, it'll be important to make sure that the system remains in a state where it can continue working as desired, which is to say, can it continue helping to power the best applications and drive value to the users who are in turn inputting value into the ecosystem. So when I think about decentralization, I think of it, I guess, a lot of it from a point of view of incentive design. You want everyone to have, a vote and everyone to be able to say as they will. And I do think that a lot of the way that the network is designed is effectively set up to basically have that as a starting point. Even with each validator able to set their own, set of incentives for how their BGT rewards are distributed effectively, which informs the overall reward rates across the network. I think that's pretty cool from a stake decentralization point of view, because you can have, different validators partner with different protocols, different LPs incentivized to delegate to validator A over validator B, depending on how much of their stake they're basically, or how much of their vote they're effectively pushing towards an LP that delegate may already be, providing liquidity to versus not, right? So I think we've tried to bake in as many of those ideals as possible. And I think that a lot of it also comes down to the team being able to bow their head out of things, right? I've often thought about how within my own team on the growth side at Berachain, I feel like I've done my job if I can step back and not have to do to say things and or guide the group, and things continue operating as intended or constructively. And I imagine the network has a relatively similar ideal end state, which is to say the core team should not have to say, hey, do this, hey, do that. In fact, it should almost explicitly not do so. The core team should be able to say, hey guys, here are the things that upon setting out have been exciting and where we think the network can be, most constructive perhaps in building the future or pushing the envelope a little bit. and we leave it in your hands to do with it as you wish, right? In terms of direction. And I think that is the whole point of decentralized governance. And I think that for us, it'll be really interesting because the people who have that decentralized governance will be the people who are willing to have the opportunity cost and are willing to do the work of providing their liquidity, which I really think of as its own sort of like public good of sorts. So yeah, I'm very curious to see the games that will evolve on Berachain, and I'd love to see the community be as responsible as possible, as supportive as possible, and as welcoming as possible to new entrants. Because if done right, I think it can really be the home for cool new stuff.
Lovely. Let's talk just about that community and the openness and responsiveness with regards to the NFTs that were on the market for some time, and now the incentivized testnet. So I would love to understand a quick primer as to your thinking with regards to those NFTs now, as well as how our community can best get involved with the incentivized testnet and kind of what the plans are for that.
Yeah, for sure. NFTs I can't comment on too much, but they are definitely, our roots / where we came from. We have a lot of love for the Bears. And, as we've always said, they're good JPEGs. So, I've never sold a bear, and I don't think I'm going to start anytime soon. To be clear, that's nowhere close to financial advice. I'm a very bad trader. I just think that it's, I like the Bears. And I think it's been exciting to see a whole bunch of other community ecosystem projects pop up. I think it's just always important to make sure that folks are also doing their research in terms of what they're buying and or what they're getting involved in. Because sometimes it's very easy to say, oh, this is going to be like, X exposure or Y exposure, when it may not actually be the case. So always good to just do their own work there. In terms of the incentivized testnet and what's happening there, as you've mentioned, the testnet is in fact incentivized. And we want to make sure that, folks who are participating there are providing us with, on one hand, tons of like really useful, feedback and support from a UX point of view, from a dev experience point of view. We had our own like mini private tests as well. Really appreciated the feedback from those guys too. So in short, we care a lot about the folks who help us and take bets on us at the earliest stage, because it takes a lot of time and effort to do different things on testnet, whether that's deploying contracts, building dashboards, or actually just using the damn thing. So there'll be a series of Quest platforms and groups that we roll out. And we also plan on doing a couple of contests or programs internally. There's one that'll probably roll out within, the next few weeks. That'll be, around, engaging ecosystem applications and projects and, sort of a fun game over there. And then there's another couple things that we're looking at closer to the end of the testnet period that'll involve a whole bunch of college teams and a competition as well, because we want to be able to draw in the best talent that's, percolating at universities right now. So in short, we think there's a way for everyone to get involved. And we'll eventually see what we can do about people who want to, sync their own RPC nodes, et cetera, stuff like that. For now, it's just a little bit trickier to have too many people getting involved there, just because, with our val set limit sizes from on the SDK side, we can only have 100 and change nodes, right, before things get really messy in terms of actual, validators. But apart from that, trying to find ways that everyone can help contribute if they so wish. But yeah, TLDR, if you're a user, fuck around, mess around the testnet, try the core dApps, and then try some of the applications that'll be building on top of it that we'll be announcing shortly. If you're a developer, there's going to be a whole bunch of different initiatives, whether that's our incubator program called Build a Bera that we recently announced, whether that is helping to build a project on the chain itself that'll be part of the ecosystem down the road, or whether that is setting up your own private RPC infrastructure, et cetera.
Lovely. Yeah, and so that's the validator situation is a result of the Tendermint kind of model. So even though that you guys are, as Rob said in the bio, EVM equivalent, you guys will still be running the validator set normally through a Kepler dashboard, for example, just as a Cosmos app chain would, right?
So not necessarily through a Kepler dashboard. We have sort of our own trackers / think like a station type app that allows you to see all the different validators and effectively their setups. And users will be able to interact with the chain super natively on the EVM side through MetaMask, et cetera. And working on Rabby support at the moment and a couple others. But in short, it's very much as we think about EVM on the top, Cosmos on the bottom. So EVM in the front, Cosmos in the back, if you want to go build very cyber style. You can interact with it and be able to bridge with a very trusted partner that we'll announce very shortly on the EVM side. And then you'll be able to basically employ classic Cosmos validator launching on the Cosmos side.
This is the L1 mullet.
That's exactly it. That is exactly it.
Do you think you have like do you think you have like the best of both worlds then? Is that kind of the thesis?
That's the goal. That's very much the goal, right? Like, I think the way that, and I've been very happy to be vocal about this, right? I think that Cosmos has had a lot of the right ideas and a lot of the right end vision over time. I think its execution has been absolutely horrible. As in, I think it's often lacked a degree of leadership. I think it's often lacked an actual direction or like an urgency of sorts. And the Ethereum ecosystem has seen a lot of these ideas and like moved relatively quickly on them. Whether that be restaking, whether that be rollups, like everything in between, right? Even the modular thesis and offchain thesis is starting to play out in the EVM world. And that is really where the devs are. That's really where the capital is. And that's really where the degree of attention is much higher. And we talked sort of about the attention economy earlier. So I think that the ideal world for Cosmos is one where Cosmos abstraction actually takes hold and there's Cosmos under the hood, but people aren't necessarily yelling about it. I can't tell you the number of investors I've chatted with over time who've been like, oh, like Cosmos chain. Ugh, I'm not too sure about that. And they're like, oh, never mind, EVM compatible. Like, oh, okay, EVM chain, but Cosmos too, nice. And I think the way that we've often thought about it is it possible to get the best of both worlds from a tech stack point of view? So, devs and capital from the EVM side and modularity / interoperability from the Cosmos side. Is it possible to get the best of both worlds from a liquidity attraction point of view, right? Can we effectively serve as this hub between EVM and Cosmos, especially once we have IBC enabled, et cetera, such that there's effectively the greatest total accessible liquidity out of any existing network at the moment. Those are the boxes that we think about checking. And those are the areas where we think it makes a lot of sense. And I feel like a lot of the groups that have done really well as Cosmos chains in the last little while haven't necessarily been yelling that they're Cosmos chains. Like I think Celestia and DYDX are both good examples of that, right? So I think maybe that's a controversial hot take in some manner. And say too, you got it, right? Like they don't talk a ton about being Cosmos, but they totally are. And I think each of them have made their own, meaningful advances, right? So I think that the brand itself is a little bit poisonous. I think the tech stack itself is quite powerful. So, we'll call it,
but it's a good one though, because you ask the average person about their staking TIA for airdrops situation, they don't even think it there. I have no idea. I mean, obviously they have to go on Cosmos to stake, but you don't really think of that. And similarly with SET, obviously there's intricacies in the difference, but yeah, that's an interesting design choice. And so I imagine that you guys could then, kind of sift communities from both, right? I mean,
that's exactly it. It's about, what's your total addressable market, right? And we think there's a meaningful market on both sides. And again, transparently, I think we weight towards the EVM side, and that's why a lot of our work to date has been, sort of trying to cater to that as much as possible. But I don't think it's wise to neglect the Cosmos community. I think there's a lot of exciting stuff happening there. Just really bad at drawing the right eyes to it in most cases.
Yeah, fair enough. So then when it comes to interop with regards to EVM and other Cosmos chains, I'm not exactly sure the bridging experience for testnet. So maybe you could tell our users how that works, community, and then kind of, yeah, I imagine it'll be somewhat of a seamless experience to get from, EVM to Beras and also Cosmos app chains to Beras as well.
Yeah, you got it. So right now, the way that we're looking at things is we can't really disclose yet, but we'll have a bridging partner that is super well known and on all the best EVM chains, in my opinion. They'll be live with us day one. It'll be on our testnet fairly shortly as well. So it should be super easy to go from Beras to any other chain with that in hand. And then I think that on the bridging to Cosmos app chains and the entire ecosystem side, we're working to get to make sure the IBC is enabled as quickly as possible. An interim measure might end up working with like a group like Union Build that can sort of have a little bit like IBC and the smart contract kind of thing, which then can be super exciting. Not locked in there yet, to be clear, but definitely discussing sort of collaborations because we don't want to cut ourselves shy of those sorts of opportunities. But the goal is really to have inroads from every angle possible. And then if we think about effectively the IBC side down the road, there's even pretty cool opportunities to be able to do things on on Polkadot and like some of those other ecosystems as well. Probably not a top priority at the moment, but yeah, the reason I paused / got distracted there is because I got a message from the group chat for the bridge partner that I mentioned saying, hey, we're live on testnet now between all these different testnets. So just let us know when you want us to rip. And I was like, okay, cool.
Nice. We are big fans of Union over here. I think that the DK-based light client bridging from ICC to EVM is very powerful. You know, what you want is an interop solution that baked in that is that removes all the trust assumptions that some of the models have today. So yeah, I got it. We'll understand how that works. It seems like you've got that one figured out, and excited to see some of that happen, because from the user's perspective, you got to make it easy. And so,
of course,
so that's something that you got to focus
on. 100%, man. And that's exactly it. Like, we don't want it to be like, I think there are some chains that have been held back by their accessibility or lack thereof. Like, I think that in the early days of Canto, it was a little bit trickier to get on board there, but I think they did a great job over time of working with more and more partners, whether that was, Synapse, Layer Zero, what have you, to make it easier to access the chain. And I think that, our goal is to make that as smooth as possible from day one, especially if folks are coming from different ecosystems.
Yes, definitely. And I think we could dive deeper into interop, but I have this burning question that I've been meaning to ask about the EVM equivalents, because I saw some community members and some research on the EVM part of Berachain, calling it EVM plus or EVM equivalent plus. What is that like? What's the difference between the just plain equivalents and what is that plus?
Yeah, it's a good question, man. And I think the dev bear will probably give a better answer, but I'll give my shot here, which is that, we have all the standard features of an EVM environment in terms of, being able to drag and drop your Solidity smart contracts. But then there's also these things called like stateful precompile. So we have built into our EVM / Polaris. And so what stateful precompiles basically allow you to do is to call on Cosmos SDK modules from within the EVM. So you can call on the bank modules or something like that, for example, right? You can use these for a number of different ways. You could use this for, beginning / end of block computation. You could use this for, bridging and or oracles down the road. There's a whole bunch of funky use cases. Many are easier said than done. But we're also pretty excited to see what people can cook up with those. They sometimes have great dev UX. Other times they can be a little bit tricky to work with. So it's very much, at one's disposal if they want to interact with something via precompile or not. But I think that's part of what we refer to as EVM plus, in that, when we talked to, when I was at, someone asked him to explain, what a stateful precompile was / why it's exciting for Argus / for them using Polaris. And it's like a cheat code for the EVM. You can basically add like a layer of pre-processing before submitting an actual transaction, which I think is kind of cool.
Very cool. Yeah, and
so it's all about the time to finality is the important part.
I wouldn't necessarily say it's about the time. I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think it's more like you're actually able to execute a transaction from EVM that's calling upon a module on the Cosmos SDK side, without having to bridge from eco A to eco B in order to make that happen. It's sort of happening within the EVM, but parallel processing within Cosmos.
And is it the precompile that allows that to happen?
Correct.
Yeah, and so basically you just get that code base from the interop part of it, like from Union or from something behind the scenes, which the user almost doesn't even realize has happened.
I think it's exactly that, in that you can choose to call on it or not, in that you can choose to use precompiles if you'd like to, but you don't necessarily have to. It's really just like at one's disposal if they should wish, right? So I think that's why, EVM Plus isn't a bad way of thinking about it. And I'll apologize in advance to any of our devs who hear this in case I butchered things there. But yeah, what I mean by that is like there's that additional layer that's an option for people to try out.
So that's what took these damn devs so long, huh, Rob?
And they're cooking.
Devs are doing things indeed. They are turning the EVM into its faster, like, next generation. It's like EVM.
Okay.
I mean, it's EVM plus, just like in the name. It pulls in these modules. It's really putting a modular approach on the EVM. by allowing it to access. I think that's the key part here, is that you have the EVM, all of the standardization and familiarity that the EVM offers, and then you also get the option to access Cosmos modules.
You got it. Right, it's plug and play to an extent if you wish, right? You can treat it like a completely normal EVM and not think twice, or you could be like, hey, cool, I'm going to try to actually like use this module.
Yeah. Very cool. So, because this tech is there functionalities to be able to have more dApps and things for users to do on chain that are like vertically integrated within Berachain? Like, could you have EVM dApps deploy on Berachain? Is there going to be dApps deployed on Berachain from, like, are they going to be in-house? Are they going to be other dApps? Like, what's the ecosystem plans look like from testnet to mainnet? What could users do on Berachain aside from kind of what you've spoken about? I know some perp vaults, some markets and things like, like, is this in-house EVM dApps, like lending markets, kind of how's the ecosystem look?
For sure, man. I think we've always been, very proud of our ecosystem and all the crazy stuff they've been cooking up. I think that, like you mentioned, when you think about this from like the native side, there's effectively like EVM dApps / dApps that are, in our case, are actually built with those precompiles that are baked into the chain. So that's like the perps, the ambient liquidity DEX, and the stablecoin lending market. But then there's also folks that are just deploying a suite of other projects, whether that be NFT marketplaces, NFT AMMs, SocialFi projects, a couple different games that are being deployed at the moment. I'd say more exotic, like yield farmers. Like, I think there's definitely like a bit of a DeFi edge / a DeFi angle. But if you can think of a basic primitive or, a more spicy one, there's a pretty good chance it's on Berachain. Which is to say, if you want yield swaps, if you want some form of like, exotic lending market, like, the vast majority of things that people use on other chains exist in some form or some combination of it on Bera. So, we've done our best to make sure that when we actually come out the gates, we have the ecosystem as built out as possible. And that's even like looking at, I think some of the next gen stuff that will really get cool adoption in the next cycle, right? Whether that is, stuff for UI / UX, like DreamOS, that allows you to like basically have all of your different dApps on your desktop almost, or in a desktop like browser, for easy accessibility and cross-chain use. Or, stuff like Waymods, like next gen custody, plus like, hack front running and smart actions for your wallets, all that kind of stuff. It's really just been our goal to give people effectively access to anything that they have on other chains natively on Berachain. And a good part of that is done through the native ecosystem, and a good part of that is done through other apps that are looking to deploy with us as, like their second home kind of thing.
So let's say a future where we have tons of dApps, user activity, everything is going according to plan, mainnet's launched. Where are you guys comparatively on the spectrum of different platforms and protocols now? Are you thinking of Berachain as like a competitor or a differentiated Ethereum to Atom, Osmosis, or is it aiming to be something like in the modular stack? Like how are you personally thinking of like value comparison, or like what realm you guys fit in? Like, what's the bull and bear case here?
Yeah, for sure. I think, I think it's much more interesting to be in the business of vertical creation or category creation than category subscription, effectively. And what I'm very interested to see if we can do is effectively build this ecosystem around proof of liquidity, right? And I don't know what narrative that neatly falls into, because on one hand, there's our, modular structure. There's a degree of interoperability in terms of the way that we hope to plug into different ecosystems. And there's, Josh from Somalia once had a line that I found absolutely hilarious, but like kind of accurate. He's like, Berachain's kind of like Eigenlayer for shitcoins, which was like kind of good in that, like, what we're really hypothecating as security here is liquidity, right? Where we're using liquidity to bootstrap or to serve as a form of security. And that can take many, many different forms, whether that be majors or shitcoins, which is pretty exciting. And it's not necessarily about the quality of the liquidity, it's about the presence or lack thereof. So I think that in a perfect world down the road, we probably exist somewhere between those two narratives of modularity, restaking with a little bit of interoperability on the back end. But really hope to form our own category around, what proof of liquidity looks like down the road, like what a really liquidity-centric chain exists looking like. So when I think about our comps, I don't know what comes to mind most natively, but I think that we think a lot about how we can be the ecosystem where people go to build something new, cool, interesting. And right now, when I think about that ecosystem, it's probably still Arbitrum, though I do think that has been waning in prominence a little bit over time. I think Base is taking some shots in that arena. I think we'll probably see folks, just hopping around a lot more of these interesting L2s. I'm sure we'll see cool stuff from Lana down the road. So, like my take is that we want to be the place where people go to build interesting new things. While of course always noting that it's pretty tough to displace ETH mainnet. And I don't think that's necessarily the goal. I think the goal is to be the place where people can go to win as a new application from ground up.
You set us in a state of silence. Very cool. Yeah, it's always interesting to hear that kind of your thought process as to where you're headed, because it kind of inspires the community and everybody else who's involved. Kind of digging deeper into that, what are the immediate kind of roadmap items and things that you have in front of you? How are you thinking about this test net, and what is a successful test net for you?
That's a good question, man. I think we've got, our own metrics that we're shooting for internally in terms of, unique users and the number of transactions and stuff like that. I think a lot of it is actually just how much, we can improve the products, how much snappier we can make the, some of the different core applications, and how we can improve user experience there. Make sure it's super easy for people to get involved, figure out all the right things from the dev tooling point of view and working out some of those kinks. So I think those are like some of the core tenets of a successful testnet. And then what I will probably care about most is increasing our rate of inbound new builders that want to build new things. I care a lot about, basically trying to form as many of these network effects or flywheels as possible to bring folks who can actually help, push the bar forward a little bit into the ecosystem. Because I think that is really the toughest thing to do. I think it's easy to find a random team of devs and say, hey, go build this that we've seen before. But for our ecosystem, I don't really care for that much. I care a lot more about what we can do to effectively find a group that will build something new on the chain that they had the opportunity to build somewhere else, but didn't, and chose to build with us, and to actually have to help curate as many of these what I consider super dApps as possible, applications that actually find a degree of adoption that bring them into a new chain ecosystem and bring new users into that new chain ecosystem. So I think GMX did this for Arbitrum. I think DFK did this for Harmony in the past, like DeFi Kingdoms before it blew up. I think Friendtech did that for Base before that kind of did its thing too. So to be clear, there's not a strong history of these having a lot of longevity, but I think that with the right design and enough shots on net, it's entirely possible to have that.
It is interesting to see GMX survive, where these other have maybe not had the same fit.
And to be fair, I think each of them had I think DFK had the whole lock jewel thing becoming liquid, and then that kind of just killed the tokenomics model, and then Friendtech Racer just disappeared or something on socials, and then people just I don't know it, and there was a whole bunch of stuff that seemed to go down there on the social / optics front that I think may have not contributed as well, but I think it was a great launch and had a ton of people engaged and was very well suited for a CT audience. But in short, I don't think that those failed because of necessarily the product itself. I think they were both quite avoidable. And I think that if you look hard enough, there's probably lots of other examples of things that actually drew people into a new ecosystem. And I think that's what we want to optimize for. It's oh, you want to try using this app? It's on Berachain, and you got to hop over. And I really do see a chain as the sum of its parts, right? The sum of the applications that are built on top of it. So it's our job to enable applications to build the best stuff.
Are there any wild dreams you have of what's possible to build on Berachain because of the tech stack that you guys have that is not possible on existing chains with other frameworks?
I think a lot of the ideas I have rely on a constant inflow of liquidity that can be used to fuel some sort of leverage, to be quite honest. Now that may be a good or bad thing, because I I think that one of the cleanest sources of PMF in an on-chain environment is leverage on shitcoins. I don't know if that's a good thing to say, but like I just think that is what a lot of people want / care about in some manner. Like,
Yeah.
so I think a lot of those systems where you can have a flywheel that's effectively juiced up by BGT and the ability for that system to be consistently raking in rewards while paying out those liquidation fees, et cetera, to BGT stakers could probably compound harder than many other ecosystems. So I've for that in the back burner.
Yeah, those leverage mechanisms are quite useful for the DGens out there.
You got it.
I ask, I ask to try to like inspire like those who are listening, who are builders, and maybe they love the community, they love the culture, and they enjoy the memes, but they don't want to just copy pasta some compounder
For sure
onto Berachain, and they really want to embrace the innovations that the innovative tech that you've put together.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, 100%, man. Appreciate it. And I think that there's definitely angles that have yet to be yet to have been fully played out that we'll see on Berachain. I expect to see some funky stuff in the NFT space. I still don't think NFT borrow/lend has been done right. I still don't think that like SocialFi has been figured out quite yet. So while these aren't necessarily areas that are uniquely powered by Berachain stack off the bat, I do think that there are areas where you can actually get what people tend to lack the most, which is users and liquidity out the gates very quickly. And that's where I think we hope to carve a bit more of an edge as well.
Got it. Yeah, that is most on the nose of what I was asking about. Essentially, like if you had an infinite amount of time, and you were able to build Berachain and then kind of like build it, like what applications would you choose to build on top of it?
Oh man, yeah. In terms of existing applications or just new stuff?
Anything. You're wild.
That's a good question, man. I don't know if I have all the answers to that off the top, but I do think that there's a number of things that have been that have moved in the right direction that we'd like to see. I'm definitely someone who thinks the most about DeFi. So one idea that I've been playing with a bunch recently that I think may actually be achieved through the work of like some of the different groups that are starting to build in the space, like Ritual or OWASP, etc. Is actually what happens at the intersection of AI and crypto. I think that's like in most cases very corny and just like a bullshit narrative, to be clear. But I do think that like there's a world where there's a super app of sorts that exists that's sort of like an AI powered like yield farmer that effectively takes into account one's risk parameterization or one's desired risk level, a whole bunch of different inputs from the actual different contracts that one might deposit into, whether that be the distribution to holders or fluctuations in APY over time. Or the actual source of that yield, whether it's fees, whether it's just emissions, yada yada yada. It actually helps to auto cycle like pool of capital, like beyond what one can accomplish in like year-end vaults, etc. In response to market conditions, prices of other similar tokens, so on and so forth. Like I think something like that, if done properly, could be like such a cool application to build, and especially on in a proof of liquidity environment where there's so many different applications that would have different changing yields as a result of validators voting for application A versus application B in terms of their emissions. So that's something that I would love to see exist on Berachain, and I'm starting to talk to one or two groups about cooking something up that angle.
Sounds epic. I'm super keen to see some of these things come to play. These money games, if you will, are really, really cool to participate in and also just watch play out. As we kind of come in,
cheers, man.
As a wrap up here, just want to give our community some insight as to what they can expect from Berachain for 2024. So what can we expect?
Yeah, man. Yeah, you got it. You should expect a couple more fun campaigns or activities over the testnet. And if you're application builder or a dev, I think that you should definitely keep an eye out for ways that you can get involved because there will be opportunities. And, colleges should also keep an eye out because we're, signing them up day by day for something cool. And then I think that you should expect mainnet this year. And I won't give an exact time, but we're looking at, Q2 timeframe. And we're hoping to just knock it out of the park and, break some dreams into reality. I think it was really funny to see the number of folks who are like, holy shit, it's real when we dropped testnet. And also folks that hopefully enjoyed our half serious, half anime outro video. We just hope to top that for mainnet. That's the goal.
asked and answered. Berachain is real. When mainnet? 2024.
You got it, man.
Epic. Smokey, thanks so much for coming on, man. So much fun.
That was really nice. Yeah, cheers. I'm always around. And for folks who want to hit me up, my Twitter DMs are open, and I'm normally pretty good at responding to them. And if not, then yeah, I'm sure there's a way to find me on TG or something.
Love it. Thank you so much, Smokey.
Awesome.